If you've noticed lately, the media isn't just biased, they're actively rewriting reality in real time. From refusing to acknowledge those deported as illegal aliens, but as Maryland man or just man, to giving Emmy nominations to fake interviews, to melting down over Trump cutting off Harvard's money because they couldn't protect Jewish students. This past week has been one big wake-up call, not just for how broken journalism is, but how far powerful institutions will go to protect their narratives. So today we're breaking down several insane stories, starting with one of the most dishonest media coverage of a deportation story we've seen in years. There are also timestamps in this video, so feel free to skip around, hit the notification bell for more news updates, and like this video to help it in the algorithm. Now, buckle up and let's dive in. So Democrats and the media have really dug themselves in an exponentially deep hole when it comes to the story of illegal alien Kilmar Abrego García. Let me explain. If you didn't know, Garcia was suspected of human trafficking during a traffic stop in 2022, and Fox News recently obtained the body cam footage of the stop.
He's hauling these people for money. You got an ass hauler is what he's doing, but sometimes they commingle dope.
No, but
He,
did you see that squad back
there's 8 people in there.
Yeah, I know. I didn't know that. They put an extra row of seats in there.
Yeah. So he's getting paid all these people, probably to Maryland, I would say, if I had my
He
guess.
said they all work together, is what he's telling me, but he's the only one that knows English.
So let me ask you this. They don't have any luggage in there, right? And if you get them out, they're going to have a toothpaste and they're going to have toothbrushes in their pockets, I guarantee it.
He's got $1,400 cash in his pocket in an envelope.
This obviously isn't great for optics. It actually further crumbles the Maryland man narrative the media has been putting out. And if you thought it couldn't get worse, Garcia was also accused of domestic violence, with USA Today obtaining an audio recording of Garcia's wife in court in 2020. In the recording, she is heard seeking a protective order, saying he repeatedly hit her and that she has video evidence of her injuries.
I opened the door and I was like, help. And then when he heard me, like, he grabbed me from my hair and then he slapped me. And then the neighbor, like, he didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to react. I have pictures of the evidence, like all the bruises, because it's not, even on Wednesday, he hit me like around like 3 in the morning. He would just wake up and like hit me. And then last Saturday for my daughter's birthday party, before I went to my daughter's birthday party, he slapped me 3 times. And then last week I did call the police. My sister called the police because he hit me in front of my sister.
You did take out a temporary order of protection against your husband in 2021. Were you in fear of your husband?
My husband is alive. That's all I can say.
Okay, and you know, I'm not going to push on that, apparently. But
you also have the ex-husband of Garcia's wife, who said in a 2018 court filing he was worried for his kids' lives because she was dating a quote-unquote gang member. Despite multiple convictions for violent crimes, documented MS-13 ties, and his status as an illegal alien, the corporate media persistently labels him a benign Maryland man, erasing any key context. Major outlets omit his illegal alien status and criminal record, framing him as a victim of endless due process. Do you think the media deliberately leaves out key details like gang ties and immigration status, or is this just lazy reporting? What if I told you the media is actually doing this in multiple case stories involving illegal aliens? Take a look at this. The New York Times refused to mention anywhere in its 400-word story that the man that raped a corpse on the New York City subway is an illegal alien. The question is, why does the media feel the need to do this? This obfuscation distorts public understanding, softens policy debates, and exposes a broader media failure to report truthfully. During an interview with an ABC host, Trump repeatedly stated that the words MS-13 was on the knuckles of Kilmar Abrego García. But there is a ton of confusion here, so let's clear this up.
He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattoo.
Oh, he had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
That was photoshopped.
The media is performing a bit of mental gymnastics here. The picture Trump is referring to does have the characters MS-13 edited onto his knuckles, but it was done to signify what the tattoos represent. It's unclear if Trump's team notified him that the actual letters were added to show what the symbol stood for, but it's kind of obvious that is the case. marijuana leaf equals M, smiley face equals S, cross equals 1, skull equals 3. The media is being partially dishonest when they say his tattoos were photoshopped. The only Photoshop was to signify what the symbol stood for. The media will also tell you that the tattoos are the only reason he was deported. They also seem to not understand the legal difference between evidence and proof. I mean, we just went through some very damning evidence that was recently discovered by journalists. We are witnessing one of the most deceptive displays of media coverage in journalism, and Kilmar Abrego García is at the center of it. So who is this Maryland man, and why should we be concerned with what he is called? Well, let's take a look. Garcia first entered the US illegally around 2011. In March 2019, he was detained along with 3 other people in Hyattsville, Maryland. Then in March 2019, he was detained along with 3 other people in Hyattsville, Maryland in the parking lot of a Home Depot. Officers at Prince George's County Police Department said the men were loitering and identified Garcia and 2 of the others as members of MS-13. The judge who presided over that case said that based on confidential information, there was sufficient evidence to support Garcia's gang membership, if not at the very least an affiliation. That finding was later upheld by another judge. In 2021, his wife, Jennifer Vasquez-Sura, filed a protective order petition against him, alleging that he had physically attacked her on multiple occasions. This is all according to documents shared by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Then in 2022, body cam footage showed Garcia speeding on the highway, swerving around other vehicles past midnight. When ordered to step out, he refused, prompting troopers to suspect he was concealing something more sinister than mere speeding. One officer noted Garcia's expired license and a lack of luggage for a multi-day trip. Things that they would say is a textbook human trafficking red flag. MS-13 alerts pinged in the National Crime Information Center database as troopers ran his record, and audio captures them discussing bringing in ICE. Yet, inexplicably, Garcia was ticketed only for traffic violations and released. Then in March 2025, as you're already aware, the Trump administration deported Garcia to El Salvador's high-security prison. His removal triggered a federal lawsuit, and U.S. District Judge Paula Zinnes ordered his return, calling the deportation an administration error. The Supreme Court unanimously upheld the requirement to facilitate his return, while explicitly refusing to force El Salvador to cooperate, leaving him in limbo and highlighting bureaucratic chaos at the border. In April, Garcia's saga reached its latest chapter when Senator Chris Van Hollen traveled to El Salvador to meet him in prison. Yet, despite all these facts, mainstream outlets like the New York Times and CNN have consistently downplayed his illegal status, focusing instead on his deportation as a due process controversy. And while Fox News opinion writers labeled Garcia the poster child for the left's endless due process demands, every mainstream broadcast repeats Maryland man without illegal alien. ABC News' version of the Tennessee stop described him as a deportee still in limbo, omitting any mention of MS-13 alerts or trafficking suspicions. Even Fox News has stuck with the neutral label Maryland man. Meanwhile, CNN dismisses any push to mention his illegal status as politically charged rather than providing the full context of his arrests and MS-13 ties. This selective reporting sanitizes violent crime when committed by illegal aliens. At a time when immigration policy is central to national debates, this kind of narrative engineering tilts the field, favoring open border advocates. Language is power. By stripping Garcia of his illegal alien status and downplaying his MS-13 ties, the media crafts a sanitized story that protects left-wing immigration arguments at the expense of public safety. Honest reporting demands that no subject be exempt from full context. What we're seeing is a media campaign to avoid a situation where Trump ever seems to be in the right. And until journalists stop masquerading as activists and return to truth-first coverage, public confusion and mistrust are only going to deepen. And if you thought the media was only hiding the truth on immigration, just wait until you hear what they're celebrating in journalism. This right here is one of the many reasons that trust in the media is at an all-time low. How do you feel about a deceptively edited interview potentially getting an Emmy award? Recently, CBS revealed that its 60 Minutes interview with Vice President Kamala Harris earned an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Politics and Government Program. The television's Academy's Politics and Government category recognizes excellence in coverage of political figures and public policy, making this particular nomination notable given 60 Minutes' own acknowledgement of manipulating the interview. Industry experts pointed out that more rigorous investigative pieces unaffected by such controversies were overlooked in favor of a segment tainted by admitted editorial spin. Curious. In case you forgot, last year, according to internal network documents and a subsequent lawsuit, 60 Minutes producers reordered Harris's responses, cut out extended pauses, and omitted entire questions where she expressed uncertainty.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We're not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
The legal complaint asserts these edits fabricated a performance that never actually occurred in the original footage, misleading viewers about her command of policy details. A Free Beacon report noted that the network tweaked the interview to present Harris as more articulate, despite her team's extensive pre-interview coaching sessions. The suit's filings specify that Harris was asked open-ended questions on inflation, immigration, and foreign policy. Many of her original candid responses were cut to eliminate verbal hesitations. Obviously, this being done right before a historical presidential election raised some questions about election interference. And now that same 60 Minutes interview is being nominated for an Emmy Award. Media analysts slammed the nomination as a reward for propaganda rather than genuine journalism. By contrast, Variety and The Hollywood Reporter coverage treated the nomination as routine industry recognition, rarely mentioning the underlying lawsuit or the network's own admissions. CNN's press review omitted any reference to the editing controversy, focusing solely on Harris's policy stances, ironically overlooking that the segment didn't fully reflect her actual answers. Media watchdog groups decried the silence as dangerous precedent, warning that political operatives will now see news magazines as extensions of campaign PR, because awarding an Emmy to a knowingly altered segment blurs the line between reporting and spin. Professional standards dictates that edits must preserve the integrity of the subject's words. 60 Minutes modifications violated this principle by creating statements Harris never actually made on camera. The episode's Emmy recognition sends a chilling message. It's acceptable to revise controversial footage for political ends, so long as it wins awards. You tell me in the comments below, if a right-wing network edited an interview in this way, would they be banned or awarded? At its core, journalism exists to inform even when truths are inconvenient. Handing out an Emmy to a segment that network itself admits was deceptively edited for political reasons is not just ironic, it's a full frontal assault on integrity. But we gotta move on to our next story, where Harvard is pulling out all the cards in its resistance to Trump's relentless fury. So the Trump administration sent a brutal letter to Harvard informing them they will no longer be receiving any federal funding.
We've just made it abundantly clear until they can come on board and fight anti-Semitism, obey the laws that the Supreme Court have put in place about the kind of admissions policies they should have, stop driving Jewish students, almost underground with their anti-Semitism and just many more things. And we've talked to them. Their answer to us was filing a lawsuit on freedom of speech. And I have said that is not the issue. It's a civil rights issue on campus relative to the anti-Semitism. And they've just said that we're trying to dictate to them how they should run their university, which is clearly not the case. But
of course, Harvard President Alan Garber was not happy and told the Wall Street Journal that revoking the university's tax-exempt status would be highly illegal and destructive to Harvard.
If the government goes through with a plan to revoke our tax-exempt status, it would, number one, be highly illegal unless there is some reasoning that we have not been exposed to that would justify this dramatic move. But tax-exempt status is granted to educational institutions to enable them to successfully carry out their mission of education and for research universities of research. Obviously, that would be severely impaired if we were to lose our tax-exempt status. And I should add, it would be destructive to Harvard.
I do want to hear your take on this. Do you think Harvard's pushback is really about free speech, or is it about protecting the political status quo? Now, to recap, after the pro-Palestine encampments and rising incidents of campus anti-Semitism, the Trump administration took decisive action against Harvard University, freezing $2.2 billion in federal grants and $60 million in contracts when Harvard refused to meet common sense demands.
I think as a political matter, if you went out and argued that to the American people right now and said, well, we're just not going to make it as a country unless we give $9 billion to Harvard that's sitting on $53 billion, you'd get your ass kicked, I imagine, in a political campaign. Now, don't misunderstand. I wish Harvard would actually work something out here. I do agree that these universities are important. They do important work. But I don't agree that we need to continue to fund people who won't listen to us when we say, you have problems. I would argue that it's a national security problem that these Ivy League colleges are turning out people who fundamentally hate Western civilization. The average American probably looks at this and says they're sitting on a $53 billion endowment. Right. They want another $2 to $9 billion. And at the same time, they keep turning out a bunch of professors and students who appear to be schooled in one thing only, the downfall of Western civilization. Why are we financing this? Is all about goes right back to the issue of what these colleges allowed to happen on their campus, both in terms of admissions and in terms of the way Jewish students were treated. He also said Harvard should apologize, and I agree. They ought to apologize to these Jewish kids that got terrorized after October the 7th, and they ought to apologize to the Asian students that were discriminated against.
Trump then warned he'd strip Harvard of its tax-exempt status unless the university acts in the public interest, labeling it a political entity more interested in ideology than education. Finding Harvard's response insufficient, the administration's Joint Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism sent a letter on April 11th demanding all sorts of things. Harvard's president blasted the demands less than 72 hours later, accusing the government of an unprecedented power grab and vowing not to, quote, surrender our constitutional rights. But defenders of the White House response noted Harvard's own admission that it has struggled to curb anti-Semitic incidents even as Jewish students face harassment and intimidation during protests. Within hours of Harvard's rejection, the education secretary announced the $2.2 billion freeze, citing the Civil Rights Act. Federal funds cannot support institutions that fail to protect students from discrimination. Harvard was warned that tax-exempt status is contingent on serving the public interest, echoing Trump's Truth Social post that Harvard should lose its tax exemption and be taxed as a political entity if it continues supporting campus bias. Harvard's decision to treat the demands as a free speech threat overlooks the real victims: Jewish students and any student who doesn't toe to a progressive line. 27% of Harvard undergrads are international students enjoying federal perks, even though student visas were revoked from dozens of pro-Palestinian protesters who disrupted classes and spread campus chaos. Legal experts have noted the administration followed proper procedure. Agencies identified specific civil rights violations, offered hearings, and gave Harvard 30 days before enforcing penalties. Harvard's critics point out that with a $53 billion endowment and $10 billion in unrestricted reserves, the university can afford reforms. And it was never about money, but about upholding federal law and protecting students. Chairman of the House Education Committee and conservative leaders applauded the move. Representative Virginia Fox said, if Harvard won't police its own campus, the federal government must step in. A sentiment echoed by prominent voices who argue Harvard has become a hotbed of left-wing activism rather than a neutral academic institution. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats launched a token investigation into the IRS, but few believe they'll challenge the administration's right to ensure taxpayer dollars aren't subsidizing partisanship. Other elite schools like Columbia, Princeton, Brown, Northwestern, and Cornell are racing to comply rather than fight, recognizing that the Trump administration has the legal authority and public support to enforce civil rights protections on campus. Harvard's staunch refusal to abide by common sense anti-discrimination demands under Title IX makes it clear. The university prioritized progressive politics over student safety and civil rights law. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Should universities lose federal funding if they can't protect all students equally, or is that just government overreach? And this ties into a similar situation with PBS and NPR, because Trump has also been cracking down on them. Trump just signed an executive order ending the taxpayer subsidization of NPR and PBS, outlets that also receive hundreds of millions to push overtly biased propaganda, this time disguised as news. The executive order instructs the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to cease all direct and indirect federal funding to NPR and PBS to ensure that federal funding does not support biased and partisan news coverage. Under the order, CPB must cancel existing grants over 70% of its $535 million annual appropriation and decline future funding to local stations for NPR PBS programming. PBS and NPR immediately condemned the action as blatantly unlawful, arguing that the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 vests authority over CPB funding in Congress, not the White House.
Both the combination of the fact that it was built as a public-private partnership, there would be some public money that went into public broadcasting that would enable stations in small communities to exist, alongside the fact that most of our support comes from people in communities. That really does create something that is very independent and very responsive to the communities that we serve.
They pledged to challenge the order in court, warning that local stations face devastating cuts to essential services like emergency alerts, children's educational shows, and accessibility programming. It is important to note that in rural and underserved areas, public media stations such as Blue Ridge Public Radio in North Carolina and Marfa Public Radio in Texas provide vital emergency updates during natural disasters, services that NPR and PBS funding helped establish. But there are legitimate accusations of bias and propaganda against PBS and NPR, despite them adamantly claiming to be nonpartisan.
I do not believe we are politically biased. No, we are a nonpartisan organization.
Would it trouble you to hear that for 6 months, there was an analysis done on PBS's NewsHour from June to November of 2023, where they found that far right that term was used 162 times and far left was only used 6 times. Do you find that troubling?
I don't know the study that you're referring to.
Meanwhile, MSNBC described the cuts as an attack on the Constitution.
But I think what the president is doing, it is a fundamental attack on our Constitution, on the foundation of this country. People need to understand and remember, there is only one profession that is protected in the Constitution. And so when you have a president of the United States who is making it his mission to attack the free press.
Despite these warnings, supporters like Marjorie Taylor Greene hailed the order as long overdue, accusing NPR and PBS of chronic liberal bias in their coverage of politics and culture. Trump administration's fact sheet noted that NPR and PBS received tens of millions of dollars annually from taxpayers, funds that they say could be better directed toward national debt reduction or veteran services. As NPR and PBS prepare legal challenges, local stations brace for impact. The fight now shifts to the courts, but one thing's clear. After today, no public broadcaster can assume federal subsidies as guaranteed. At the end of the day, President Trump's move to cut the cord on NPR and PBS funding could be seen as either a victory for taxpayers or a long overdue check on media outlets that traffic in partisan spin rather than straight news. If public broadcasters want federal dollars, perhaps they should earn them by serving all Americans, not by echoing the coastal elite's progressive talking points.
I'm a member of the DOJ Subcommittee of Oversight. We were tasked with finding waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government and highlighting it. And one of those that we found, which Republicans and conservatives have talked about for decades, is state-sponsored media in the United States. China and North Korea have state-sponsored media. The United States does not need state-sponsored media. Listen, if Fox News or any other conservative news organization came to me and asked for taxpayer money, I would tell them no. And I certainly don't think we should be funding left-wing propaganda outlets like NPR or PBS. I had a hearing just a couple weeks ago where I got to question the head of NPR and ask her about some of the wild, outrageous things that she had been posting on the internet for the whole world to see, and she had no answer for that. The American people are sick of funding institutions who promote values that they find repugnant, and that's what we're doing with NPR and PBS. And that's what we are hopefully soon, via a rescission bill, going to pull those funds back.
Let me hear from you though. Give me all the best takes on the stories we've talked about. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you found this breakdown helpful, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. As always, be smart, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one.